Welcome, everyone, to Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We're your hosts and co-founders of FantasyForesight.com, coming to you from the Rambo Fixture Company studios. I'm Ben.
And I'm Jay.
You ready to get rolling, Jay?
You know it. Let's do this.
All right, let's go. Welcome in, everyone. It is Tuesday, September 22nd. We've got our guy Steve at FF_encyclopedia back with us, and I'm ready to close the book on week 2 and move it on to week 3. And once again, Fantasy Foresight, the podcast, is live. How you doing tonight, Jay?
Oh, Ben, what a week 2 in the NFL and fantasy football. The storyline were injuries. The war of attrition has begun. Look, we all thought we were going to be dealing with guys being out this season, but we thought it was going to be for like COVID reasons and things like that. This we should have known. No preseason. We should have known. Steve, how are you doing tonight?
Well, it's funny that I have started going by Basement Steve, just to find myself in the basement in a couple of leagues after 2 weeks. Yeah, like you said, the injuries have been brutal, and I'd say more than anything, I'm a little nervous about tonight because waivers are going through, and
I'll tell you what,
pins and needles.
For the listeners out there, nobody scrambles and scrapes like our guy Basement Steve. He can put together a roster out of nothing and win fantasy matchups. So I am intrigued about what you have to say about the top waiver ads tonight.
Nothing's over.
Exactly, my friend. Nothing is over. Ben,
All right,
what do we have tonight?
Yeah, here's what we're going to do tonight. We are going to breeze through the review of these buys and sells from week 2, go over all these stupid injuries, take a quick look around the league, and then sit back and let Steve tell you who to target on the waiver wire in week 3. So quick disclaimer, if this is your first time listening, just know that we're speaking in terms of single QB, full PPR redraft by default, and all of our fantasy finishes as well as fantasy points per game calculations are all based on full PPR limited to weeks 1 through 16. According to fantasypros.com. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it. We had 7 buys and just 3 sells this past week, and we kicked it off with, thank God, a correct one. Atlanta Falcons quarterback Matt Ryan. He was a buy versus an aggregate projection of QB9, and he ended up as QB6, so Total Foresight got that right. He threw for 273 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. All 5 of us, Total Foresight and Trav included, got that one right. I love Matty Ice. Thank you. We needed all the help we could get this week. All right. So next up, I was going to say, if you guys don't have anything to add, I will.
There's some guys I will add to, but no.
Okay. Well, I've got a little bit to say about this one. San Francisco 49ers running back Raheem Mostert. He was still correct. He played one half of football. Okay. And he was a buy versus an aggregate projection of RB21, and he still finished as RB16 in one half of football. 8 attempts, 92 yards, a touchdown, 2 receptions on 2 targets for another 15 yards, went over 100 yards off of 10 touches in one half. And then that stupid field over there at the Jets. He's my RB2 in my league of record, and Christian McCaffrey's my RB1 in my league of record. So you can imagine how I'm feeling today. We all got that one right as well. So, so far so good. Looking good, right? 2-0. Everybody's doing great.
Starting off great. And I share that backfield in the Fantalist Premier League. So, yeah, it's going to be a rough couple of weeks coming up.
Indeed. This is where it started to go downhill for me, at least. We had New York Giants wide receiver Darius Slayton. Total Foresight and myself were buying him versus an aggregate projection of wide receiver 22. Man, we got this one wrong in a big way. He ended up as wide receiver 79, 3 catches on 6 targets for 33 yards. Steve, Jay, and Trav saw this coming. You talked about the consistency very astutely, Jay, in our last episode and how it fluctuates all over the place. And, Darius Slayton has yet to show that he can put 2 games together in a row. And we'll see what he has in store for us in week 3.
In draft season, we kind of referred to him as an unsexy name, but probably a smart pick in fantasy, just as a nice WR3 type player. But these are the type of games that makes him a difficult pick and a difficult guy to trust week in and week week out. You know, we talked about how he had done it against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, so we thought we could trust him even though he was going up against the Bears defense. But it turns out, no, we can't trust him week to week against tough defenses. He just happened to have a surprisingly good game against a very tough defense in week 1. So pretty disappointing. You know, I think Steve and I were in the same boat where we didn't feel great about it, but that WR22 price tag was just maybe a little bit steep. We saw him maybe finishing in a few spots behind that. I don't think anybody would have expected for him to finish in as WR79 with only 3 grabs on 6 targets.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, Jay, because you mentioned that we both, you know, we said it, don't necessarily feel good about it. And that can just lead us right into the next guy that Ben's going to review, because man, I felt the same way for the same reasons. And I believe I even said I'm probably going to get one of these wrong.
Yep.
Well, spoiler alert, good old Foresight Ben's only right 2 more times in this episode, and this is one of them. And we're talking about Buffalo Bills wide receiver John Brown. Total Foresight and myself were both buying him versus an aggregate projection of wide receiver 26. Steve, Jay, and Trav were selling, and Total Foresight and myself got that one right. He finished as wide receiver 13 off of 4 catches and 6 targets for 82 yards and 1 touchdown. You know, John Brown and that Bills offense, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, it is looking unlike anything I imagined it could possibly look like this soon in this specific COVID offseason. Man, if these guys can stay healthy and get some time to really develop some legitimate chemistry and then have a full offseason together heading into next season, look out.
You know, we made a lot about Josh Allen's downfield accuracy, and you know, not a ton has really surprised me so far in 2020, but the way that Bills offense has looked, it's much more explosive than I would have thought, and Josh Allen has played better than I expected. Now, we'll see if that'll continue, but through 2 weeks, he's been one of the brighter spots so far.
Yeah, it's definitely been one of the more interesting storylines 2 weeks into the season, and certainly seems like Buffalo knew what they were doing by bringing Stephon Diggs into the fold. Yep. We'll talk about him soon enough.
And the second I saw that John Brown highlight with the touchdown, I pretty much threw something across the room like, of course. You know, of course. Fine.
Your record this week was fine. You can afford a couple L's. Don't you worry about it.
I started off 3-0 though, man. Now I'm going to reel off 3 straight wrong ones, and I'm irritated about every single one of them. Maybe the least about John Brown, but the next 2 especially.
Well, definitely for me, next up, Chicago Bears wide receiver Allen Robinson. Man, we sat here and talked about how disrespectful wide receiver 30 was as an aggregate projection and how easy of a buy it was. And all 5 of us, Total Foresight and Trav included, got it wrong because he finished as wide receiver 78. 3 receptions on 9 targets for 33 yards and no touchdowns. Jay, I'm on your side. I blame Mitch. It's his fault. That's a joke.
Welcome to the club. There's plenty of room. Admission is free.
And you know, it's at some point yesterday I was just kind of like scrolling through Twitter on my lunch, and I don't know who put it up there, but someone had mentioned that Allen Robinson has caught 100% of all of his catchable passes this season. So you know, the 9 targets were there. Just, you know, I guess 66% of those weren't catchable balls. So
validated.
It's just tough because, you know, I feel like he was in the same boat last season, but
again, you know, you love the volume. The volume's fine. The targets are great. It's just like you said, Steve, it's the catchable balls and getting him in a position to succeed, and it just wasn't there. So I don't know, man. That's a frustrating one because the opportunities should have been there.
You know, we're getting off track a little bit here just because it's an enjoyable topic, but I only ever supported Mitch as much as I did because I felt like you came at him unnecessarily hard in the offseason when I shared the news that he was my QB4 in Scott Fishbowl, which, by the way, he helped me get a nice win in week 1. But this week you're messing with my A-Rob, and now you're starting to make me mad. And I'm ready for the Nick Foles. Jay.
Yeah,
Okay, that's fine. Let's go. Bring in somebody that can accurately pepper my guy with targets, please, because
MVP,
this 3 for 33 trash is unacceptable. No.
Thank you.
No.
Welcome to the dark side.
Speaking of unacceptable.
Oh boy.
I just like James Conner, and we're going to talk about him too. The one time I ever jump over from the never side to the okay, I see it. I see what everybody else wanted to talk about way before back in the day, and I say that Tampa Bay Buccaneers tight end OJ Howard is all of a sudden going to be able to exceed the lofty expectations of tight end 25. Couldn't even come close to it. All of us were wrong except Trav. Trav sold this. I mean, good job, Trav.
Travis, what were you doing? Like, all the guy had to do was not be one of the 7 worst fantasy tight ends in the league this week on a great offense that it was shorthanded Chris Godwin, and he musters 1 catch.
He had like 6 targets in week 1, and so he gets half as many targets this game. He can't convert on any of them. We joked and said all you need to do is like 3 for 23 to be tight end 25, so it's pretty safe. And like we said, he couldn't even do that. And we'll talk about him a little bit later, but I made a comparison about OJ Howard and Noah Fant because all the respect I was given to Pittsburgh Steelers defense, and man, was that wrong. And you know what? Let's keep on the was that wrong train and keep it going with Buffalo Bills.
Hold on, real quick. OJ Howard finished as tight end 40. 39 tight ends finished with more fantasy points than OJ Howard. I didn't even know 39 tight ends scored fantasy points last week. What?
It was the first and last time I'm ever going to accept any positive pub about OJ Howard. Get out of my face with it. Get out of my face. All right. You know what? This is one I'm very happy to be wrong about. I got to say, there's a lot of things that really annoy me. This is something that now I am a fan of and I am excited to watch. And I'm talking about the other Buffalo Bills wide receiver, the wide receiver 1 on that team, Stephon Diggs. Total Foresight was correctly buying him versus an aggregate projection of wide receiver 14. And, he got it right. Jay got it right. Trav got it right. Me and Steve both got it wrong. He ended up as wide receiver 2 overall, 8 receptions on 13 targets for $153 and a touchdown. Like, this is the vintage Stephon Diggs when fully healthy, when a couple years ago, Jay and I were comparing him to a non-crazy looking Antonio Brown. Yeah. So, it's nice to see the talent come to fruition. It's nice to see the total shift in that Buffalo Bills offense. And it's nice to see the total shift in apparent capability and talent in Josh Allen with the deep ball attempts and the pass accuracy that was nowhere to be found last season.
No. Again, one of the bigger surprises, and I'm happy for Stephon Diggs that he's able to, take advantage of the situation and that it's coming to fruition for him. And you're right, Ben. When Stephon Diggs is healthy, he's one of the more dynamic playmakers in the NFL at the wide receiver position. The only question for me is how long is he going to stay healthy this season? A season that has been we've already seen massive amounts of injuries and soft tissue injuries that Stephon Diggs has been plagued with his entire career. It's going to get cold in Buffalo. Muscles are going to get tight later in the season. So, you want to ride this train as long as you can. It's just going to be an interesting thing to monitor about when you should hop off.
Yeah, it's a lot of good points you do make, Jay, as far as, hey, for anyone listening, Diggs is on fire. If you can find like the right buyer and get like a haul in return, just playing the odds of whether or not you think you can rely on Diggs all season.
Right.
If you believe that, hang on to him. But like Jay, maybe if you had him right now, you'd probably be shopping him around a bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Steve, this will be the season where he stays healthy, the full slate, right when you deal him. But as long as you get a great return, whatever.
Man, I made a business trip from Cleveland to Columbus a couple years ago just to close a Stephon Diggs deal before the trade deadline. Man, like I've been in on this guy for years, trust that. But I just was not believing in Josh Allen's ability to throw the ball deep or to throw it accurately. Like we didn't see anything. Like, yeah, sure, he had great arm talent, could chuck it down the field, but it was always like not within 10 yards of his receiver.
Right.
So, all of a sudden, get some quality guys and he can do some things. And I guess he's been working in the offseason. I don't know. It's fun to watch. I hope it continues. We'll have to stay tuned and find out. Next up, we had repeat offender on this podcast, Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson. His aggregate projection heading into the week was QB4. I want to know who saw what to project that. Total Foresight was selling, and Total Foresight was being way too generous in our opinion, as we discussed on this pod, even giving him the respect of QB9. We got it right from a selling the QB4 standpoint, as he finished as QB21 overall. He did have 270 pass yards, but just one touchdown and one interception, and he only added 17 rush yards and no rushing touchdowns. So all five of us, including Total Foresight and Trav, got that one right. And I mean, it was Baltimore. Like, what made people think he was going to be able to ball out to the extent that you have to ball out to be QB4 on a
Exactly. Week? Yep. The odds just weren't there. All right, Benny, here you go, bud. You know what? I'm a little fired up about this one, to be honest with you.
You know what? Not as fired up as I am, because this is once again the guy that I was always selling, always against. I couldn't trust him, liked him as a person, loved the character story, but just no, too rich for my blood, too risky for me. But last week, the one time, like I finally come out and say in week 1 that he's going to do something. He doesn't do anything. Come out in week 2, and then all of a sudden I'm done with him. And he wants to go and play like he should have looked in week 1.
You know
like
what?
He wasn't hurt in week 1. He just got sat for Benny Snell. And now all of a sudden you remember how to play football? Like, what's going on?
I don't know if he did, Ben. You know what? I saw that game, and James Conner ripped off a 60-yard run in the filthiest of garbage time. At the very end, when the Steelers are just draining the clock, trying to get a first down to win the game, he busts through, breaks it off for 60 yards. Can't get in the end zone because he got chased down. But, that's 60 yards of his 106. Otherwise, we're sitting here having a conversation about he had 16 attempts for 46 yards and a score. It's a completely different thing. He got lucky. He lucked out and made us look bad in doing so.
Yeah, like we talked about Sunday, guys, I don't think any of the logic we used to come around on selling James Conner this past weekend was wrong. Just for what you said, Jay, Denver, not an easy matchup. And the way he looked in week 1, and for how good Snell looked in week 1. And then, we just saw, Snell just really wasn't utilized. So,
but for literally,
you're right.
For 59 minutes of the game, he had 46 yards.
I knew all of it came on one big play. I didn't know it came so late. That's annoying, number one.
Yeah.
And is it not so 2020 fantasy football for James Conner to have a productive and healthy week on the week that everybody else in the world gets hurt? Like, that's just it's so stupid. It makes sense. It makes sense.
Yep.
So, rounding out this list of buys and sells before we close the book and move it on to week 3, we had Denver Broncos tight end Noah Fant. Sir, I apologize to you. I have been in on you since the preseason. I acquired you in a trade when I missed out on you in the draft. I loved starting you week 1 and you balled out. I gave far too much respect to that Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I will never sit you again, Noah Fant. You are my guy. And I was wrong to sell him as a tight end 10. We were all wrong to sell him as a tight end 10. He finished up as tight end 9, 4 catches on 5 targets for 57 yards and 1 touchdown versus that Pittsburgh defense. If he could do it against them, he can do it against anyone. And now that Sutton is done, Arrow is way up for the rest of the season.
Steve, what did we say? We had this conversation. We said, really to beat tight end 10, you have to get in the end zone. And just in that matchup with the way things were going, we just didn't want to bet that he would catch a touchdown pass, and he did. And good for him. It got him into the top 10 and made us wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It was the kind of game where you didn't really forecast Denver scoring more than maybe 17 points. And it just didn't look like, especially with Minkah Fitzpatrick back there and the way that secondary is, you didn't see it being funneled to Noah Fant. But like you said, Ben, never again.
Yeah, it did. And, you know, the most important thing, you know, we've got a fun little competition going on amongst us and Travis, but the most important thing is how Total Foresight's buys and sells perform throughout the season. And through 2 weeks, you know, in week 1 went 12-10, and week 2 went 5-5 for a total of 17-5. So, you know, like you said, Jay, Vegas operates at a 4 or 5% margin, 17-15. We expect to get better.
Yeah.
We will get better.
Oh, yeah.
We will continue to improve our process and continue to be on the right side of 500. Everybody else on this podcast is on the right side of 500 except me. I'm 15-17. I've got some work to do. I'm 0-2 in my league of record, yet somehow 2-0 in Scott Fishbowl and the points leader in my conference. So, you know, whatever. It's all hilarious sometimes, but it's situations like this, you can throw your hands up and be like, oh, what are you going to do? Or you can get back to work and figure out what you're going to do next. And there's going to be no exception to that, and least of which will apply to our buys and sells of week 3. So closing the book on week 2, Jay, tell us about all the horrific injuries that were suffered.
Oh boy.
week.
And you made a great point, Ben. You can either sulk and let the season go, or you can buckle up and get to work. And that's what a lot of people have had to do this week. And I started it early in our league of record. But boy, did we see a litany of big-time injuries occur this week. And we should have known that this weekend's games were going to be crazy when a starting quarterback went down with an injury before kickoff during warm-ups. We should have known it was a sign of what was to come. So let's run through real quick. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey expected to miss multiple weeks with a high ankle sprain. Saquon Barkley, torn ACL, done for the season. Devontae Adams, a minor hamstring strain, although they believe that it may not affect his playing time. Raheem Mostert, an MCL sprain, expected to miss multiple weeks. Cortland Sutton, torn ACL, done for the season. Cam Akers, rib injury. Last I saw, there were test results pending, but you know, they're probably going to hold him out since they have plenty of backs in that offense. Paris Campbell he avoided ACL, but has a PCL injury and is sidelined indefinitely. Jimmy Garoppolo, high ankle sprain. Sounds like he may play this week. He gutted through a performance over the weekend, but we'll have to keep an eye on Jimmy G. Tevin Coleman, knee sprain, expected to miss several weeks. Sterling Shepard, turf toe, did not play Sunday. Drew Lock, sprained AC joint, out 2 to 6 weeks. Brashad Perriman, again, with an ankle injury, left the game and is week to week.
Gross. So
and and guys, honestly, that's just, you know, if you go back and look at the injuries, that's just the offensive skill positions. There were just as large of injuries on the defensive side and also on the offensive line. I mean, it was just a cavalcade of injuries this weekend. It was really, really unfortunate.
It was unlike any weekend I've ever seen with we've seen some lockout type seasons before and a lot of rash injuries here and there, but like just so many big names and the severity of so many injuries. It was just like, it just was one after another. It just didn't seem real. And real quick before we move on, I apologize. I mentioned mine in Total Foresight's record. I did not mention that Trav is the current leader of our little competition at 19-3. Jay, you are at 17-15, and Steve, you are at 16-16. So we've all got some work to do.
I'm only 2 games back. I'm coming for you.
Yeah, we've all got some work to do, and it's going to start in week 3. I promise you that. We're gonna have a hallmark accuracy week coming up because we've got a couple of those we get to celebrate every season. And I think we're about due for one in week 3. So just like last week, luckily I had the opportunity to sit down and take a look around the league and just bring a little interesting note statistically or what I observed just based off of week 2. So going in alphabetical order. First up, Atlanta. Gurley's Ridley's usage continues to be a concern, currently sitting at RB33 overall. Calvin Ridley is currently the wide receiver 1 overall. And more surprisingly, Russell Gage is currently the wide receiver 7 overall. And as bad as everybody thinks Julio's doing, he did have an amazing week 1 and did have a down week 2. So he is at wide receiver 17. Like the 3 wide receivers for the Falcons in the top 17, and Julio's the lowest of the 3. Pretty crazy. In Arizona, the Kyler hype was real as he currently sits at QB4, and DeAndre Hopkins is wide receiver 2 overall and first in targets with 25. And they have a very cake schedule coming up, so they could be staring down the barrel of 5-0 and 6-0 here coming up. In Baltimore, Mark Ingram leads the backfield with 21 total touches, followed by Gus Edwards with 14, and then J.K. Dobbins with 10. And so far, reaching doesn't pay at the quarterback and tight end position. Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews are each 10th in their respective QB ranks at QB 10 and tight end 10 overall currently. So, it's only 2 games, but so far, if you spent that high-end draft equity, you might be wishing you waited a little bit. Moving on to Buffalo, we have got Devin Singletary. He's currently on pace to almost double his 2019 receptions total. He had 29 last year and is now on pace for 56 currently. Josh Allen is second in pass attempts with 81 and 9th in accuracy at more than 70%. And yes, Stephon Diggs is currently wide receiver 4 overall. They got better from week 1 to week 2. Like, this offense is getting scary. Moving on to Carolina, DJ Moore has 4 more targets on the year than Robbie Anderson, but Robbie leads him in receptions, catch rate, yards, touchdowns, long reception, yards per target, and yards per reception. So keep your eyes on Robbie Anderson. In Chicago, A-Rob has been targeted 18 times, which is 2 times as much as the next targeted wide receiver 9. Better days are ahead, especially if they bench Mitch. Moving on to Cincinnati, AJ Green is currently wide receiver 61 overall, yet tied for 4th in wide receiver targets in 22. Better days are ahead there as well. In Cleveland, Nick Chubb has only outtouched Kareem Hunt 34-29 on the year. Hunt is currently RB9 overall, and Chubb is RB13. What a value Kareem Hunt is turning out to be. In Dallas, wide receiver target watch, Amari Cooper has 23. CeeDee Lamb has 15, and Michael Gallup has 10. Amari Cooper is wide receiver 16, Lamb is wide receiver 25, but Gallup just wide receiver 62. Looks like CeeDee Lamb is the second wide receiver to roster in that receiving core, and not Michael Gallup like we all saw him to be last year, at least through 2 weeks. That's always the caveat. It is a very long season, but we can only go based on what we're seeing, and it's a perception versus reality deal, and that's why I want to bring these facts to you every week. In Denver, Melvin Gordon is currently an RB1 as 12th overall through 2 weeks, and with Sutton out, Fant will see an uptick above his 11 targets through his first 2 weeks. Yep. In Detroit, so apparently Kenny Galladay was the not-so-secret sauce in their offense last year. Matt Stafford is just QB 19 through 2 weeks without him, and that offense looks like they need a wide receiver 1 almost as much as the Houston Texans. In Green Bay through 2 weeks, Aaron Rodgers has a 119 passer rating and is averaging 300 plus yards and 3 touchdowns per game, and he has yet to throw a pick. Over 16 games, he's on pace for 4,800 yards and 48 touchdowns. I know that's extreme, but 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns is absolutely realistic with how he's looking right now. In Houston, we've got the lone bright spot. Tight end Jordan Akins is currently tight end 14 in fantasy points per game with 12.2. Keep him on your tight end streaming radar. It's the best I got. In Indiana, speaking of tight ends, Mo Alley Cox was tight end 10 in week 2. If Jack Doyle continues to miss time, Mo Alley Cox is a very viable starting option at the tight end position. In Jacksonville, my guy James Robinson is clearly the guy in that Jags offense. Through 2 weeks, he's the 16th most consistent running back in fantasy, and he finished as RB9 in week 2. Thus far, he's proven to be a rock solid running back too. Oh yeah, and don't forget about wide receiver Keelan Cole, who's now the 14th most consistent wide receiver in football through 2 weeks, and is wide receiver 17 overall. In Kansas City, I think I've cracked the Tyreek Hill code. Whenever Sammy Watkins goes down, people talk about Mecole Hardman. However, in Sammy's absence, you can plan on Tyreek for a boom week much more confidently. For the LA Chargers through 2 weeks, Joshua Kelly has been the 22nd most consistent running back in football, finishing on the brink of an RB2 finish each of his first 2 weeks. The LA Rams, the combo of Malcolm Brown and Cam Akers has accounted for an average of 23 rushes and 4 targets per week for 2 weeks. If one or both of them is limited or out, then the path to an absolute explosion is there for Darrell Henderson in week 3, Buffalo defense or not. In Las Vegas, I keep bringing this up because this was my main harp on Darren Waller in the offseason. He is first in tight end targets and second in tight end fantasy production overall. Yeah. No wide receiver concerns there. He is the number 1 pass catching option in that offense. Moving over to Miami, with Devontae Parker limited, wide receiver Isaiah Ford has led Miami in wide receiver targets. If Parker misses any more time and you're desperate for a wide receiver, Ford could be a sneaky play. Keep him on your streaming radar if necessary. In Minnesota, Adam Thielen is just 17th in wide receiver targets despite being a leading wide receiver in his offense. In fact, Atlanta, Carolina, and New England all have 2 wide receivers with more targets than Thielen in 2020. So, if you have, I don't know, shop him. That's what I'm saying. In New England, through 2 weeks, Cam is QB3 in consistency and QB3 overall. The Bill Belichick, Josh McDaniels, Cam Newton marriage is working beautifully through 2 weeks, even though they're at 1-1. I think everybody saw how well they played against the Seahawks on Sunday night. So, yeah, sky's the limit over there. And isn't that just like Bill Belichick to have his team looking a little bit better than the outlook of TB12 down in Tampa Bay? Moving on to New Orleans, speaking of washed-up quarterbacks, Traquan Smith is both the wide receiver targets leader and fantasy points leader in that offense, and he's not gotten in the end zone yet either. Of all the wide receivers in New Orleans, he's the one you want until Michael Thomas gets back. And Drew Brees is done as a fantasy elite quarterback. He's QB 22 overall and QB 27 in consistency through 2 weeks. Without Michael Thomas, he has no shot. Moving over to the New York Giants, Saquon now has 2 of 3 NFL seasons riddled with injuries. Hope he gets well soon and comes back better and stronger. Enter Devonta Freeman, the undoubted best chance at fantasy running back relevance in that offense. But I will say this, before you run out and spend $1 million in fab on this guy, just understand that if he does actually follow through with signing, because it's not all the way official yet, I know they've agreed in principle and all that stuff, but it's going to take him a minute to pick up that offense, and I don't necessarily see him coming in like immediately in week 3 and supplementing your Saquon production.
And
so
still a bad offensive line, and Saquon didn't do much running the ball there either.
Also a very sound point. Moving over to the New York Jets, your only hope is that Gase gets fired. That's it. For now, the most fantasy relevant aspect of the New York Jets is that you need to target defenses that play this dumpster fire of a team every single week. In Philly, the trash I talked about, Drew Brees? Well, Carson Wentz is even worse. He's sitting at QB 25 overall and QB 28 in consistency. Not looking good. In Pittsburgh, Deontay Johnson is second in the NFL in targets with 23. Without Juju's week 1 touchdowns, there'd be no question about who the wide receiver 1 is in that offense. In Seattle, only Green Bay, Buffalo, and Atlanta have a pair of wide receivers that have more combined fantasy points through 2 weeks than DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Russell Wilson is most definitely cooking. In San Francisco, I've got nothing. Just please give me back my Mostert. I want him back. Please just give him back. And Jets, no more playing over there. Get your field right. Come on. All right, Tampa Bay. This will be Tom Brady's first week where both Godwin and Evans are presumably 100%. What TB12 looks like in week 3 may be the best indicator of his season-long potential. In Tennessee, Corey Davis is now wide receiver 20 overall, wide receiver 17 in consistency, and yet he's just 33rd in targets. If A.J. Brown continues to miss time, you can confidently start him as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. And last but not least, in Washington, Antonio Gibson, in my opinion, has taken over Washington's backfield. Heading into week 3, he leads the team in running back carries and total running back touches. Fun fact, only 15 running backs improved their week 2 finish over their week 1 finish more drastically than Antonio Gibson. And that is your quick look around the league after week 2. And now my favorite part of this episode, Steve-O, hit us up with our waiver wire targets heading into week 3.
And before I dive into that, I just have to say it's going to be a crazy active week heading into week 3 for waiver wire additions. But it's kind of dirty in a lot of ways. There's not necessarily, I mean, because we're all facing all this action because of all the injuries, but there's not a lot of cut and dry additions that we can make that are just going to step in and give us even close to the production that we're hoping for, or at least that we're missing out of guys like Saquon Barkley and CMC. And I do want to say, I throw some like fab recommendations out there, and that's always going to be based off of a $100 budget just to make things simple. Very simple math. $20, 20% of your budget. So, all right, we'll get started with the most important position, the one that people are most interested in heading into week 3, and that is running backs. And right at the top, and Ben, you mentioned him already, Joshua Kelly, running back for the LA Chargers. Man, if he's available still, which he's only rostered in 39% of Yahoo leagues as of this morning, you got to go get him. Dude got 25 touches, went over 100 total yards, and this was in a game that Austin Eckler still saw over 20 touches himself. So there's definitely a cut and dry role that Joshua Kelly has in this offense. And, of course, should something happen to Austin Eckler, then you could really look out. He also looked good in the passing game Sunday as well. For me, if you need a running back, probably you could spend $30-35 on him because I think that he's somebody you can at the very least flex. And for some of you people out there that are missing Saquon or CMC, you could at least throw him in your running back 2 spot, and hope that you get back that production. I think you said, Ben, he's been right on the cusp the last couple of weeks. Yep. So long as he keeps getting that goal line work, he's certainly going to get there in some of the weeks upcoming the rest of the season. So for me, here's where it gets a little murkier, guys, because I think there's a lot of varying opinions on some of these players. And we'll just start with Devonta Freeman. You guys already alluded to it. So long as he passes his physical COVID tests and all of that stuff, he would step in and be the starter. Probably not a heavy workload immediately. Like you said, Ben, you don't want to vouch for him putting up even flex numbers probably in this first week. So don't go blow a ton of your fab budget. Don't go spending 100% because you think, hey, he'll step in and replace Saquon because you're thinking of Devonta Freeman from 2015 and 2016. Please, anyone listening, remember the Devonta Freeman that we saw the last couple of years in Atlanta. There's a reason this guy has been on the street the last couple of months. Like, he can step in and probably, if he's comfortable, produce at a flex rate, maybe give you some RB2 weeks. So keep that in mind. For me, as someone who in a league desperately needs to replace Saquon, $25-30 absolute tops, and I'm willing to spend up to that because I am missing Saquon Barkley. So, that's what I got on Devonta Freeman. Darrell Henderson Jr., running back of the LA Rams, only rostered in 30% of leagues. He looked outstanding this past weekend. Of course, the big caveat with all of wanting to put a lot of money into spending up for him is, Malcolm Brown has looked good one week. They really want to get Cam Akers involved. Of course, Brown and Akers are both a little dinged up right now, so the opportunity is there for Henderson Jr. to take hold of the backfield. So it just really depends on how much you believe in that. For me, if you need a running back, spend up to get him 30, 35. If you believe in him, $40, whatever, I guess whatever you think it takes to get him. And if you believe in that, but just know that there's going to be risk involved with that. And for all we know, guys, we're going to look back at this Rams backfield at the end of 2020 and it'd just be a frustrating mess. And there's definitely potential for that. If you're one of the unfortunate souls who has lost run CMC for the next month or so, Mike Davis is only rostered, rightfully so, in 7% of leagues right now. He's out there. He's available. You're not looking at him as having, obviously, any kind of season-long lasting value. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about what you want to bid on him. However, he, for CMC owners, makes the most sense as like a month-long stopgap. For me, though, I personally would put him in like a $10 to $15 range. I've seen some stuff out there where people are recommending like $40, 40% of your fab budget. And that's for a guy that's going to step in for a month. That just seems a little rich for me. But again, I know some rosters are hurting right now. So you do what you got to do. Now, some much cheaper, possibly with a little bit better season-long value appeal. There's Myles Gaskin, Miami running back, rostered in only 16% of leagues. This one's not sexy, guys, but if you can only spend, $10 and get a guy who's so far in two really brutal matchups with New England and Buffalo, he's put up 10 and 14 PPR points. So if you're just trying to float by for like a month while CMC is on the bench, that might do the trick, save you a little bit of fab money. For all we know, we'll look back in a month and he'll end up scoring just as many PPR points as a Darrell Henderson. It's a possibility anyhow. And speaking of like stop gaps, for 1 week, Jerick McKinnon, he's only rostered in 25% of leagues. Tevin Coleman, I believe I saw he's already ruled out for this weekend or this Sunday. And then you have, Mostert looking like he's going to miss at least this week. So if you're looking for someone who can come in and, he's maybe going to finally earn some of that contract that he signed, they're going to give him the football. Now, Jeff Wilson Jr., he'll be active. He'll get some touches too. That's a guy you could probably wait till tomorrow morning and just go grab for nothing. But Jerick McKinnon would be the guy with the upside to actually give you, Mostert-like, I'd say Mostert-light production this week. So for me, even though it's just 1 week, $10 to $15 if you're, trying to win your week, especially if you started out your season 0-2, it's like a do or die this week. So, and again, all things you want to keep in mind when you're trying to decide what you want to or need to bid. If you're 2-0 and Mostert goes down, maybe you're like, I got this with whatever I have on my bench right now. And, there's been a lot of talk about Deion Lewis, Wayne Gallman Jr. If you feel the need to spend anything on them, go for it. But, so long as Devonta Freeman passes physical, like I don't see much value in either of those guys. So we'll go ahead and move on to, I take that back. We can't forget about Frank Gore. I wouldn't spend anything in fab though.
That's the most important point about him.
Yes. Will he get 20 carries? Probably, but 60, 70 yards, and they probably won't get in the red zone for him to score a touchdown. So I've just seen his name floated, so didn't want to come off as like I forgot about him, but I think we all should at this point. We'll go to receiver. There's a ton of different receivers that could be viable as like, a 1 week stopgap, but I'm just going to limit it to 3 people that I like most is at least having upside, the guys you'd actually want to play multiple weeks throughout this season. And Ben, you talked about that Atlanta receiving core already, but I like to think at this point, Fancy Foresight's podcast, he's like one of our guys, Russell Gage, because we've been talking about him since going into the season. You know, a guy that was talked up by Atlanta beat writers as having a sensational camp, 30 receiver. All the writing was on the wall for him to kind of ascend in that slot role. And man, that Atlanta defense has lived up to what all of us fantasy folks wanted it to be. It is trash. I feel like they're going to have to throw the ball 45, 50 times every week. And so long as that's the case, Gage is going to keep getting those 8, 9, 10, 11 targets every single week. So in full PPR leagues, there's a reason why the dude's sitting at wide receiver 7. You know, it doesn't seem sexy. It might seem boring, but I feel like he's going to give you a floor of double-digit scoring in PPR like pretty much every week just because of the offense and the role he has in it. So, you know, me personally, I mean, I if I needed a receiver, I'll spend 20, 25, maybe even 30% of my fab budget to acquire him if he's available. And he's still out there in 77% of leagues as we speak. So, 'cause, come on, right, guys? There's a ton of teams that need receivers right now. So many soft tissue injuries. Hello, Cortland Sutton fantasy managers everywhere. Next up, N'Keal Harry. Only rostered in 28% of leagues, New England wide receiver. You know, the thing that really caught my attention, and obviously it was a higher passing volume game for Cam Newton. I get that. But there's going to be more of those as the season goes on. But he got 12 targets, caught 8 of them for 72 yards. It was it equates out to a 15-point PPR week. You know, and he looked okay week 1 too. So, you know, there's probably some kind of a floor there. And they desperately need anybody to be a red zone weapon besides trying to run Cam Newton into the ground every single week. Hopefully, you know, maybe N'Keal Harry can take that next step and kind of be, you know, he has sort of that Kelvin Benjamin-esque builds to him. Obviously very different players, but but you know, we can hope. And that's why he's somebody you could probably pick up for 10 to 15 bucks and, you know, just kind of see what happens. Worst case scenario, if you had to, you could play him this week. And then Ben, another guy that you touched on, my last wide receiver, Keelan Cole, wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's only rostered in 4% of leagues. And, you know, if you're new to fantasy football, you don't remember the name Keelan Cole, but if you've been playing for a few years now, Keelan Cole, he's had his moments and stretches, and he's
another one that's been an R guy on this podcast for years.
Yep.
We have talked about him in multiple seasons for years now.
I've used him down the stretch for a stretch run of a championship myself back in the day. But, you know, he's a guy that I really believe is very talented. For whatever reason, it's come and gone in stretches for him. But so far on the season, he's caught 11 to 12 targets. He's been in the end zone both games. Obviously, Gardner Minshew looks comfortable with him, and he has out-targeted DJ Chark through 2 weeks. So, you know, for someone that you could probably go get for about, you know, a $10 bid, worth your while to do so. And then for anyone out there who doesn't want to have to spend anything, you could get up probably tomorrow morning. If you're desperate, there's Adam Humphries, Cole Beasley, Larry Fitzgerald, just kind of your tried and true full PPR masters that can give you that 8 to 10 points every week. So they're out there, but obviously the upside is extremely limited with those individuals. So we'll get into there's a trio of tight ends that I think are pretty exciting, and I'll start with Drew Sample, Cincinnati Bengals tight end, only rostered in 2% of leagues. And you know, I got to give a little shout out to our guy Travis. He reached out to me about spec stashes Friday morning after the game, and you know, I admittingly fell asleep at the tail end of that game when I thought it was comfortably in hand for the Cleveland Browns. And, you know, I didn't catch, you know, I read about it, but, you know, CJ Uzomah done for the season with an Achilles injury. And, you know, Sample comes in the game, you know, and this is later on into the second half, catches 7 of 9 targets for 45 yards. And going back and looking at, you know, YouTubing that and watching those targets, like, it just looked really good between he and Burrow. And, you know, so far on the season, 21% of the massive amount of targets in Cincinnati have gone to the tight end position. So when you take CJ out of there, I mean, Sample's the guy, and they look good together. So, you know, I'm willing to spend like 10, 15 bucks to get the guy if I need a tight end, because I just think we've seen how much they're throwing the football in Cincinnati. And we talked about in our preview podcast, they throw the ball a ton last year. So
well, and not to mention that he and CJ was putting up some fantasy production early on, you know.
Yeah, no,
so
you're right. He had been absolutely relevant. So it's like if all that production can kind of get rolled up into one tight end, you know, kind of look out. He's definitely a sneaky guy that wouldn't, you know, there's probably a lot of leagues people will pick him up for nothing, but I'm bullish on him. Can't not talk about Dalton Schultz, Dallas tight end, who's only rostered in 2% of leagues. Obviously, it was a barn burner this past Sunday. We don't know if we're going to see that kind of pass. Game. Yeah. So you don't want to bank on him seeing 10 targets every week, but you can't ignore the fact that he did have 10 targets and that he caught 9 of them for 88 yards and multiple scores. So it kind of just goes along with why, you know, a lot of us were in on Blake Jarwin, that tight end position for the Dallas Cowboys, and Dak Prescott's propensity to target the tight end position. So again, I'd put him right in that same, if you want a tight end and you believe in that, spend 10 to 15 bucks for it. You know, to find a good, solid week-to-week tight end one, it is so hard to do with consistency. And if you believe that's your guy, go for it. And then Ben, you mentioned it earlier, Mo Alley-Cox, the biggest man in the NFL. Caught 5 of 6 balls for $111, led the team in receiving yards by a wide margin. So this is one where if it looks like Doyle's going to be out, and which is why you don't want to put a high bid on him. Maybe just throw like $1 to $5 down and secure him. He's a guy who will probably show up on stashes this week. He's only rostered 1% of leagues. So, but yeah, with that, I mean, big guy, big tight end target. Phillip Rivers was digging it.
And Phillip Rivers always loves to throw to his tight ends. Antonio Gates for all those seasons, you know, Hunter Henry, and now Mo Alley-Cox, baby.
Yep, sure does. And quarterbacks, there's only one quarterback that I really feel like merits speaking more than, 30 seconds about, and that is Gardner Minshew. Goodness gracious, gentlemen. 6 touchdowns through 2 games. Still only rostered in 32% of leagues. I have a feeling that's going to change dramatically heading into week 3 with a delicious matchup against the Miami Dolphins, who we've seen just be torched the first couple of weeks. So if you believe in Gardner Minshew, I mean, spend what you have to. It's quarterback, so you don't want to go crazy. But, for me, I do as little as 10, maybe even as much as $20 if you want to make sure you get Minshew. Hey, if you're a Carson Wentz rosterer out there, you might want to spend 25-30% to have Minshew moving forward. He's looked fantastic so far.
A lot of people were laughing at me that I chose to roll with Ryan Tannehill and Gardner Minshew and Scott Fishbowl, and it's looking pretty good so far.
Yeah, no, I feel like on this podcast we have all been very high on Gardner Minshew. I mean, I liked him as a low-end quarterback 1, which now it's like maybe he'll well exceed that by the end of the season. I don't know. Yeah. And then, hey,
because the efficiency's there. Like, it's not just a volume thing where, it's just a bunch of garbage time. Like, the dude's pretty accurate, and they've won a game.
And of course, then when you have volume collide with the efficiency, then that's when you can start getting some real bonkers numbers, which is going to be great. And then 3 names I'm going to throw out there if you're playing the streaming game at quarterback. Phillip Rivers plays the New York Jets. Mitchell Trubisky, if he starts for the Bears, they play Atlanta, guys. That's all I'm going to say about it. They play Atlanta. And then Ryan Tannehill gets Minnesota, Minnesota's defense is struggling. And Ryan Tannehill has started the season on fire, 6 touchdowns through 2 games. And hey, you mentioned it already, Jay. When you're looking, or I'm sorry, maybe it was you, Ben. I just was shaking my head in agreement because I was already thinking it. But the New York Jets, they are fantasy relevant this season for the simple fact that you target their offense on a weekly basis when you're streaming defenses, and that's the Indianapolis Colts to get them this week.
Ooh, nice.
So, I mean, throw $1 to $5 down. Depending on your scoring system in your league, I know in our league of record, you can have a very aggressive point total out of a good defensive effort. Yep. In that case, it's probably actually worth spending $5 on a defense, even if you're going to use it for 1 week. But obviously, spend accordingly. And then the LA Chargers are only 31% rostered out there, guys, and they do get the Carolina Panthers, who will have to travel west to play them with no CMC. So, and you maybe throw a buck down on that. So that is the really long, crazy waiver wire additions for week 3.
It's going to be crazy tonight, gentlemen. We're all going to wake up tomorrow. We're going to cross some fingers and see what the heck happens and see what kind of fab is spent where. It's going to be nuts.
In this league, we get up at 3:30 a.m. when those things are processed.
My wife's always like, "Why are you up? Did you set an alarm?" And I'm like, "I swear my body just knows when it is Wednesday morning."
Roll over, check the phone. What happened? All right.
Wake up like it's Christmas morning to see what you got.
Hey, before we get out of here, I had a couple of fun things for you guys. One, we have Ryan Fitzmagic against Magic Minshew this weekend, which is a great matchup. Did you happen to see...
That's Thursday, right?
I believe so, yeah. Did you happen to see their back and forth?
Yes, where Ryan Fitzpatrick talked about how people said, with beards are better because mustache growers are patsies or something like that.
They have patchy sides. They have patchy sides. And then Gardner Minshew responded saying, "I'll let mine speak for itself, but I'm going to have respect for my elders, especially when they're much, much older." So some great back and forth there. A great Thursday night matchup, and then we end the week with a fantastic Monday night matchup, Ravens and Chiefs. That is going to be juicy. A great week of football. I do have some trivia for you that I heard today that I thought was interesting this week. They've got a quarterback situation in LA, obviously. Let me get this up real quick for you guys. As we know, Tyrod Taylor did not play, had some health issues, went to the hospital. If you had to guess, Tyrod Taylor has now had 10 NFL seasons. How many 300-yard passing games does Tyrod Taylor have in his career?
Has he had one?
I feel like it's 0.
Yeah.
He has had one.
Equal to Justin.
Exactly. Justin Herbert had one in his first game out with about 5 minutes notice, and their head coach is non-committal. Like, what? Okay. It's going to be a crazy weekend once again. Let's just hope guys stay healthy this weekend, shall we? And lastly, before we get out of here, I did want to note, Ben mentioned it a little bit in the Scott Fish Bowl. I got to give Ben some credit. He has started the season 2-0 and currently ranks 122nd overall out of 1,440 competitors in the entire competition. I am currently 1,000 places behind Ben at 1225. It's been a rough go so far. I've been a little bit unlucky, but it's been fun. It's been fun. But Ben, man, looking great early on. Let's keep that going. And in our very own Fantasy Foresight Challenge, we have to give some credit where credit is due. It's been a rough go for Team Foresight as challengers currently hold the top 4 spots and the 3 only unbeatens.
That's because I just lost after putting up 179. Get out of my face with
it's been a tough start so far, but we're going to rebound this week. I believe we have 4 head-to-head matchups between Team Foresight and Challengers this weekend, so it's time for some redemption. We're going to get back to it and get this competition going. So good luck to everybody this weekend, and it's going to be another crazy one.
Hey, thanks for the shout out, man. I didn't even know that was my rank out of that. I knew what my record was. I knew, about my own conference.
But like crazy, and you were 2-0, so I had to look it up.
But most importantly about that is that I made it out of week 2 pretty much unscathed health-wise. Like I have Devontae Adams, who does have the hammy, but relatively speaking, that's fine. And I have Devontae Parker on the bench, who still scored 15 points that hopefully I could use if I needed to next week. Nice. So, when I'm losing in the Total Foresight Challenge while I'm putting up almost $180, when I'm 0-2 in my league of record, and when I was 3rd in scoring after week 1, and now I lose CMC and Raheem Mostert, I am appreciating and enjoying the Scott Fishbowl experience so much, man. Like, it all balances out, and you kind of get it where you need to in fantasy somewhere. So hopefully anybody that is, that's dealing with all these injuries in week 2, you have a variety of leagues, and some leagues going well for you. And Steve gave you a lot of resources. There's still trades to be made.
Absolutely.
There are still waivers to be had. There are still things to be done that can help you get you where you need to go until your studs come back, or if you have to pivot altogether. So it's a long season. 0-2 seems like a steep mountain to climb, but you just got to take it 1 week at a time. And as a reminder, we are back with you every Sunday morning now at 10 a.m. to give you a fresh list of all of our buys and sells. So we'll see you at Sunday at 10 a.m. for all the buys and sells for week 3 and Steve's speculative stashes. Can't wait.
And that wraps up this episode of Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We thank you for joining us. Be sure to visit us, as always, at fantasyforesight.com. Use the links at the bottom of the page to find us across social media, including Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you pod. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time.